You had the tyrant leader of Hisham bin Hakam. May Allah's curse forever fall upon him. So often when we talk about the life of an Imam Ma'soom, we always speak about the relationship and what occurs with the Taghi of the time. If we're talking about Imam Ali alayhi salam, we always bring into context the affairs of Muawiyah, for example. If we talk about Imam al-Rida alayhi salam, we always contrast it to Ma'mun al-Rashid, for example. This is the second relationship in history we can turn to. Third relationship is the relationship of the Ummah of Islam in relation to the other communities outside of Islam. As you know, at the time of Islam, there were many different nations and powers. Early on, there were two particular powers, wasn't there? There was the Roman Empire and the Persian Empire. What those two empires did impacted the people of Arabia. And we can often see that the activities of revelation or the Prophet were in response or relation to those nations around him. This is a third way we can understand the role of an Imam or what the Imam was doing in accordance with the other nations around. The fourth one is to understand what was happening in the non-Shia world at that time. So you know, of course, the Sunni or the non-Shia community, they have their own Imams, they have their own ulama, they have their own role models. And often what is happening between those sects, the Imam has to respond to or has to give guidance in accordance with. And so once we understand what is happening outside the Shia world, we also can understand how the Imam is navigating those political issues, those religious matters at that time. And the fifth thing is for us to be able to understand what is happening internally to the Shias at that time. For example, you know that if I talk to you about the 9th Imam's time, you know that many of the Shias did not accept the 9th Imam early on because he was a young boy at that age of 5 years old, becoming an Imam Ma'soom, 7 years old, becoming Imam Ma'soom. People rejected the 9th Imam. So for us to understand how the Imam is responding or dealing with things is always as well in regards to the internal relationship of what's happening with the Shia as well. 5 areas of study that one can apply to understanding what the Imam is doing, why the Imam says a certain thing in a certain time, and so on and so forth. Normally, we as a Shia community, we never talk about the first one. We never talk about the relationship of Imam to Allah's laws for an ummah. We often talk about the relationship of Imam to the Taghi of the time. We very rarely talk about what was happening outside of the Muslim ummah in order to understand how that was affecting the Muslim ummah. In regards to the fourth, we will rarely talk about what was happening in the non-Shia world that the Imams might have been responding to. And from time to time, sometimes we talk about what was happening internally between the Shias and how the Imam was being affected by those matters. But once a scholar or a historian or a student looks at all 5, do you get a holistic picture of the life of the Imam? For tonight, I want to be able to focus on 2 of these 5. And these are quite prominent, the normal 2 that we try to think about. Number 1, what was happening at the time of the Imam in relationship to what was going on with the Sunni community at that time, and how the matters internally between Sunni and Sunni, between those of the city of Medina and the way in which they were beginning to understand their own formulaic issues, how they were beginning to structure the idea of having a madhab and scholars that were specialists in the city of Medina to give fatwa. How did that affect Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam? Number 1. Number 2, what was occurring internally in the Shia that the Imam alayhi salam had to be able to respond to, that ultimately directed the way in which he would speak, the way in which he would address matters, and how ultimately the Shia were affected by the internal issues, conflicts that were occurring between Shias at that time. The question I want to pose is this. Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam is establishing the university in the city of Medina al-Munawwara for the first time. Soon after him will come his son, Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, who has 4,000 students in the city of Medina. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam is going to teach astrology. He's going to teach medicine. He's going to teach philosophy. He's going to teach theology. He's going to teach Arabic grammar. He's going to teach fiqh. He's going to teach tafsir. The foundation of the Ja'fari school of thought is Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam's establishment. But Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam had heavy scrutinization and rejection upon him because of two major issues. One, what was happening in Medina at that time, the way in which Ahlul Madina would think and react to matters, number one. And number two, what were the internal conflicts between the Shia that would ultimately force the way in which Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam would respond. In looking at these two, I want to have a historical discussion, a contextual discussion to the Imam's life, but also to think about our relationship to the Imam and how we gain from that school of knowledge that he established in his time. So for the love of our fifth Imam, Muhammad al-Baqir, let's have a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. What was occurring in the city of Medina al-Munawwara that Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam was affected by? By the time of the fifth Imam alayhi salam, there had been a number of cities that had become scholastic cities. The main two were Medina al-Munawwara and the city of Kufa. And they had different trends in the way in which they did their ijtihad, the way in which they understood Islam. In summary, it's very simple. In Medina al-Munawwara, because it was a city that was inheriting directly from the practices of companions of the Prophet, the statement and the cultures that were in circulation in Medina was given heavy weighting. It was considered to be a hujjah, an evidence. So if there was a statement from one, person, he says, I've heard from this person, who's heard from this person, who was the companion of the Prophet, that the Prophet did this chain of narration was very, very weighty. Why? Because the city itself has grown up under the practice of the sunnah of the Prophet. So you can hope that the way in which they're praying, the way in which they're fasting, the way in which they're giving zakat, all of that should be immediately inherited by only 2 generations from the Prophet to that time. So what was given credibility was what was known as the culture of the city of Medina. That's what they said is hujjah, an evidence of what the Prophet used to do. Kufa, however, was geographically distanced, isn't it? It's in Iraq. It became the capital of the Muslim Ummah when Imam Ali alayhi salam shifted it from Medina to Kufa in order to protect the Ummah from what was happening in Damascus, be closer to Damascus to protect from the attacks of Banu Umayyah, Muawiyah and Abi Sufyan. Kufa had a different method of interpretation. They would give weight to things like their own opinions in interpretation. And they would use their rationality to say that in logic, this makes sense to me, therefore the way in which I interpret a hadith has to be in line with my logic. And so there was 2 different kind of overarching cultures and philosophies in those 2 cities. Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam is situated in which city? Medina al-Munawwara. So his immediate context of those around him from non-Shi'as is that what comes from the Prophet, what comes from the companions, what comes from the sons and the children of the companions, known as the tabi'een, the followers of the companions, that was considered to be evidence. Why? Because why should there be anything other than what the Prophet is practicing? It's only 2 generations later. That's evidence for us. Now I want to read to you a hadith to show you the types of trouble, the difficulties Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam had. And if you could understand this hadith, you will get an image of why Ahlul Madina rejected Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, and why they thought Imam al-Baqir was an imposter. Na'udhu billah. You see, those children of the companions, the followers, that generation, they en masse rejected Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, and the hadith will explain why. So this hadith actually comes to us from our sixth Imam, Jaffer Ladak, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh. So remember, Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam is explaining why his father was rejected in the city of Medina. Why the ulama of Medina didn't like Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam. Now this hadith is verified by Ayatollah Sayyid Abul Qasim al-Khu'i, rahmatullahi ta'ala alayh. In his works, he has mentioned this hadith, so I'm quoting to you on the authority of Ayatollah al-Khu'i, rahmatullahi ta'ala alayh. The hadith says as follows. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam says, Imam al-Baqir would regularly visit the companion Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari and show him great reverence, great honor. Imam al-Baqir would visit Jabir and show Jabir, the companion of the Prophet, great reverence, great honor. Afterwards, the Imam would sit with the people of Medina. Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam would sit with the people of Medina and narrate hadith to them from his own father, Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam. Hadith from Imam al-Sadiq. He says, my father used to sit with the people of Medina and say, my father al-Sajjad says this about this issue. But the people of Medina would say, for sure, we have not seen anyone as bold as this person, al-Baqir. Basically, how dare he? Now, why do you think they would say this? There's two reasons. Number one, as we said, the authority in their minds was what? A chain of narration that came from the Prophet to the companion to the follower, the tabi'i. And so long as the tabi'i says, I have heard from companion such and such, who has said that the Prophet has said such and such, that's authoritative. Not Imam al-Sajjad, not Zayn al-Abidin, and not your quoting Zayn al-Abidin. That's not authoritative. So they would reject Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, firstly because he would quote from his father. Now tell me, has his father, Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam, met the Prophet? No. Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam never met the Prophet, right? So they would say, why are you quoting from someone who never met the Prophet when we can have a chain of narration that goes back to the Prophet himself? So they rejected Imam al-Baqir, number one. Number two, second reason why Ahlul Madina rejected Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam was because of his young age. He was less than 20 years old when he became Imam. Maybe 19 years old when he became Imam. So they would say, here is a tabi'i. This man is 60, 70 years old. This is a guy who's been sitting inside Masjid Nabawi, giving fatwa for 50 years. And you, a 15-year-old, a 19-year-old, a 25-year-old, is coming along and giving fatwa? So they would reject Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam on the premise of his age. Now what's very interesting is, to combat this, those who knew Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, they would defend him even about his age. This hadith is from Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari. There is no companion alive at that time greater than Jabir. Jabir was in 19 battles with the Prophet. 19. Jabir has been with the Prophet since the very, very beginning, since the second pledge of Aqaba. Jabir used to say this in public. Ya Baqir, O Imam al-Baqir, لَقَدْ أُوتِيتَ الْحُكْمَ الصَّبِيَّةِ Allah has given you prophetic wisdom from the time in which you was a child. If you've got all of those elderly companions and elderly tabi'een sitting in Masjid Nabawi giving fatawa, rejecting a 19, 25-year-old young man in Imam al-Baqir because of his age, the greatest mufti at the time, Jabir, is saying, you have been given special wisdom since the time you were sabi, since the time you were a child. Can you get a better advocate for Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam than Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari? So the first problem was this. He used to quote from Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam. Imam al-Sajjad had not met the Prophet. They would say, why are you quoting from this? We want a chain back to the Prophet. Second, because of his age. We continue with this hadith from our sixth Imam. Sixth Imam says, al-Baqir would regularly visit Jabir, showing Jabir great honor. Afterwards, the Imam would sit with people and narrate to them hadith from his father, Imam al-Sajjad, but the people of Medina would say, for sure, we have not seen anyone as bold as this person. The hadith continues. So when Imam al-Baqir noticed what they were saying about him, he decided not to quote from Imam al-Sajjad. He would quote directly from the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. So instead of saying, Qala Abi, my father said such and such about this ayah, about this hadith, he would say, Qala Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. The Prophet has said this hadith. What do you think they said about him? If they said, your father never met the Prophet, what would they say about this young 19, 25-year-old man? You haven't met the Prophet. Do you know what they say? This is Imam al-Sadiq's tradition, continues. So when Imam al-Baqir saw what they were saying about him, he would narrate traditions directly from the Prophet. But the people of Medina would say, certainly we have not seen anyone lie more than this person to be able to narrate from someone he has never even met. Very interesting, isn't it? Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam does the opposite of what you imagine he might do. You would think that he would go the route that the rest of Ahl al-Madina are going by. They're saying, Tabi'i, follower, said, I heard from companion X, who heard from the Prophet. So you would think he would try to match them and say, I heard from my father, as-Sajjad, who heard from his father, al-Husayn ibn Ali, who heard from his father, Ali ibn Abi Talib, who heard from Rasulullah. That would be like for like, wouldn't it? All right, you give me your chain of narration, I'll give you my chain of narration. Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam would skip the chain of narration. You know what he would say? Qala Rasulullah. Rasulullah said this. Rasulullah did this. Rasulullah did this when this ayah was revealed. This is the meaning of the ayah according to Rasulullah. Why? Surely that would provoke Ahl al-Madina even more against you, wouldn't it? Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam is not trying to be in competition with the ulama of the time. He's not going, well, this is your manhaj methodology, this is your madhab, so I'm going to create my madhab and we'll have an intellectual battle. Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam is vested with the authority of Allah on earth. He is the repository of the knowledge of Allah on earth. He is the location of the Risala on behalf of the Prophet, to the extent that the Prophet himself says, O Jabir, when you meet Baqir, pass him my salam. Because I want everybody to know the position of Muhammad al-Baqir, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi. Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam immediately cuts out all of that to say, understand who I am. I'm not here building a rival madhab with you. This is Ahlul Bayt. There is a different level of knowledge altogether. So Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam provoked their thought process about how a 19 or a 25-year-old or 30-year-old could actually directly quote from the Prophet without any wasita, without any intermediaries in the middle, because Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam is vested with the knowledge of these individuals. Now I want to show you how Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam wanted them to understand his position and his role. Open the Qur'ans, inshallah, to Surah Al-Haqqah, and you'll see the difference between the manhaj of Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam and the manhaj of the companions and the tabi'een, who need a chain of narration to go back to the Prophet in order to verify what they have to say. Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam is in a completely different level, a completely different plane altogether. Have a look at Surah Al-Haqqah, chapter number 69 of the Quran, verse number 40 to 47. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says this about the Quran, about the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Verse 40. إِنَّهُ لَقَوْلُ رَسُولٍ كَرِيمٍ. Most surely it is the word brought by an honored messenger. وَمَا هُوَ بِقَوْلِ شَاعِرٍ. It is not the word of a poet. قَلِيلًا مَا تُؤْمِنُونَ. How little it is that you believe. وَلَا بِقَوْلِ كَاهِنٍ. And it is not a word of a soothsayer. قَلِيلًا مَا تَذَكَّرُونَ. Little do you pay attention. Now look at what Allah says about the Prophet, to the Prophet, that if he was to make up anything about this religion, if he was to say his own ideas about this religion, look at how Allah Jalla Jalaluhu threatens the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Tanzilum min Rabbil Alameen. It is a revelation from the Lord of the universe. وَلَوْ تَقَوَّلَ عَلَيْنَا بَعْضَ الْأَقَاوِيلِ. If he, the Prophet, was to fabricate anything against us, if he was to say anything different about what this religion, what this Quran says, لَأَخَذْنَا مِنْهُ بِالْيَمِينِ. We would certainly have seized him by the right hand. ثُمَّ لَقَطَعْنَا مِنْهُ الْوَتِينَ. And we would have severed his aorta. فَمَا مِنْكُمْ مِنْ أَحَدٍ عَنْهُ حَاجِزِينَ. And none of you could have protected him from us. None of you could have stopped us from doing that. Think about this set of ayat. What did Allah say about the Prophet? If you were to make up even one additional statement about Islam, or you were to fall short and remove one thing from Islam, immediately Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have grabbed you and severed your aorta, and none of you companions could have stopped it from happening. Imagine how much pressure there is on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to be as accurate, as perfect, as faithful to Islam as possible. Is there any space to be able to allow the Prophet any mistake here at all, whatsoever? Any iota of mistake? None whatsoever. Now imagine when Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam is saying, I am going to quote to you directly from the Prophet. Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam is not an ordinary alim like alim A, alim B from Medina al-Munawwara. He's not making things up. He's not quoting on the basis of a chain of narration. He's not saying, my opinion is this against the other scholar. He is telling you that the reason why I go directly to the Prophet in chain of narration is because I know exactly the words of the Prophet, because I am his inheritor and vested inheritor. And I don't play games. The same way, if the Prophet was to say one word out of place, Allah would have cut his aorta. The same things would have happened to us, Ahlul Bayt alayhim wassalam. We don't play around with it like you people from Medina play around with it. I'll show you a hadith from Imam al-Baqir himself who explains this even better in his own words. Our fifth Imam, Muhammad al-Baqir salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi, says, I quote to you from Fi Rihab al-Aqidah by Ayatollah al-Hakim al-Tabatabai. Ayatollah Hakim died only a few months ago, you'll remember, from the city of Najaf. He quotes a tradition. قال Abu Jaffer, Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam said, لو كنا نفتي الناس برأينا وهوانا لكنا من الهالكين. If we were to issue fatwa upon people by our own personal opinions and our own desires, لَكُنَّا مِنَ الْهَالِكِينَ, certainly we would have been destroyed. Allah says about the Prophet, I would have cut the Prophet's iota. Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam says, if we did the same thing, if we added one iota to the religion, if we took away one iota from the religion, we would be from the halikeen, the utmost destroyed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The hadith continues. وَلَكِنَّا نَفْتِيهِمْ بِآثَارِ مِنْ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ وَأُصُولِ عِلْمٍ عِنْدَنَا نَتَوَارَثُهَا كَابِرًا عَنْ كَابِرٍ. But we issue fatwa on the path of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the principles of the knowledge that are with us, that have been inherited by us by one after another from us. Now listen to this line from the Imam, fifth Imam. نُكْنِزُهَا كَمَا يَنْكُزُ هَؤُلَاءِ ذَهَبِهِمْ وَفِضَّتِهِمْ. We store the knowledge of the Prophet like these people store up gold and silver. Is it the same? Is the school of Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam like any other alim from Medina al-Munawwara? No. If we had made up one word, Allah would have destroyed us the same way Allah would have destroyed the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is the first issue of what was going on around the city of Medina al-Munawwara at that time. The second is to think about what was happening at the time of our fifth Imam between the Shi'as, and how the Shi'as were dealing with a certain internal conflict, and how the Imam then responded to that in accordance with those internal dynamics. You've all heard that during the time of the fifth Imam alayhi salam and after, there was a revolution that was taking place at the hand of Zayd, the son of Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam. Correct? Zayd wanted to follow in the movement of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam and believed in the overthrow, the insurrection against Banu Umayyah, la'natullahi alayhim ajma'in. In the Shi'as, there was a split. Some people followed Zayd, the son of Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam, and some people followed Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam. What was the opinions of the Zaydi Shi'as that made them split off away from Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam? They believed in an important principle that they believed separated them from Imam al-Baqir and Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam. They believed that for you to be an Imam Ma'soom, a divinely appointed Imam of Allah, you always had to raise the sword against the Taghi of the time. He said, look, Prophet raised the sword against the Quraysh. Imam Ali alayhi salam raised the sword against Muawiyah, for example. Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam raised the sword against Muawiyah, for example. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam raised the sword against Yazid. Correct? Same family. So they said, for you to be an Imam, the precedent is you must raise the sword. If you are not having an open revolution, then you're not really Imam Ma'soom. We can't follow you. So they broke off from Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, because Imam al-Baqir was not participating in the overthrow at that time. Because as you know, he would have been killed. Banu Umayyah would have put him to the sword, and Imam had a wider role to play. So Imam led a quieter movement. Zayd, however, was part of the revolutions at the time. So many Shia broke off because they wanted to overthrow Banu Umayyah. They hated Banu Umayyah, and they saw that if there was an Imam that was raising the sword, they believed that was the Imam of the time. This is just an overview in case anyone didn't know about Zaydi Shi'ism, the split between Imam al-Baqir and Zayd's followers at that time. One of those followers, or later on, after the death of Imam, there was a companion who was the most close companion to Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam by the name of Abul Jarud. Okay? Just keep this name in your mind for a minute. Abul Jarud. At the time of the fifth Imam, alayhi salam, Abu Jarud was one of the closest, best companions of the fifth Imam. To such an extent that we have, or have been passed down, a tafsir from Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam through Abu Jarud. And our earliest scholars took this book and said, we quote from it. We trust this book from Abu Jarud so much because he's such a close companion to Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam that our earliest scholars in Ghaiba considered this book to be sound. There's a book, it no longer exists. Some of those hadith remain, but that book was a book which was from Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, a set of tafasir for us. Part of that book remains until today. The actual book has been lost. From Abu Jarud, the companion that narrated all of these hadith. The problem was, straight after Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam's death, Abu Jarud became one of the biggest Zaydis. He didn't believe in Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. He rejected Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam and turned to Zayd. According to some narrations, he fought with Zayd and was killed alongside Zayd. I want to show you how Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam tried to help these people at that time. What he actually said to Abu Jarud to help people like this not to split off from Ahl al-Bayt alayhim wassalam. Split off from me, Imam al-Baqir, and head towards another Imam just because he's raising the sword. Just because it's popular to raise the sword at the moment against Banu Umayyah. Same book by Ayatollah al-Hakim al-Tabatabai. Some people say yes, some people say no, that his movement was blessed by Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam. In my humble opinion, no Imam is a quietist Imam. Just sits in the corner crying, doing salah all day. If every Imam was revolutionary, every Imam tried to establish Imamat over Khilafat. Sometimes they could only do so at a distance because of the oppressions upon them. So they used means. I humbly suggest the Zaydi movement was a means, a distance means by the Imams to help overthrow. Some other scholars believe this, but there's a difference of opinion as to whether Imams were quietist or non-quietist. So I'll read to you this hadith and see how Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam tries to deal with the splits occurring with the Shia. And he addresses Abu Jarud, who tomorrow, when Imam dies, he's going to split off away from Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam and to go towards the Zaydiyya. Listen to this hadith. وَفِي حَدِيثٍ أَبِي الْجَارُودِ. Hadith narrated by Abu Jarud. عن أبي جعفر, from the father of Imam al-Sadiq, who is our fifth Imam alayhi salam. قال, Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam says the following. إن رسول الله دعا عليا في المرض الذي توفى فيه. Rasulullah called Imam Ali alayhi salam during his illness, which was eventually to take him to his death. So in those last weeks that the Prophet was dying from illness, he called Imam Ali alayhi salam and said the following. Ya Ali, make note of this from me, such that the secrets which Allah has given to me, I will gift them over to you, Ali. And whatever I wish for you is the same that Allah wishes for you. Take note, Ya Ali, so you gain these secrets and you get what Allah wants for you. The hadith continues. فَفَعَلَ ذَلِكَ رَسُولَ اللَّهِ بِعَلِيٍّ. So Rasulullah did this for Ali. He gifted him this secrets, this knowledge to raise him to this maqam that Allah would want for him. فَفَعَلَ ذَلِكَ رَسُولَ اللَّهِ بِعَلِيٍّ وَفَعَلَهُ عَلِي بِالْحَسَنِ. Ali did the same thing to Imam al-Hasan and said, come here, I wish to give you the secrets of Allah so that you know what Allah wants from you. وَفَعَلَهُ عَلِي بِالْحَسَنِ وَفَعَلَهُ الْحَسَنِ بِالْحُسَيْنِ. And Hassan did the same to Imam al-Husayn. وَفَعَلَهُ الْحُسَيْنِ بِأَبِي. And Husayn did the same thing to my father, Imam al-Sajjad. وَفَعَلَهُ أَبِي بِي. And my father, al-Sajjad, did the same thing to me, Imam al-Baqir. Don't split off from me, O Abu Jarud. Understand that the knowledge we are gifted is not simply because we raise the sword or we don't raise the sword. The Prophet said, Imams Hassan and Hussein are Imams whether they sit, or whether they stand. It doesn't matter whether they are sitting with sulh or they rise against the taghi of their time. They are still Imam. Understand these things. Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam had to try to deal with the conflict internally between the Shia to try to stop them from splitting off and tell them that just because me or my son doesn't raise the sword against Banu Umayyah or Banu Abbas doesn't mean that we are not the Imams of the time. Understand, Imamat is gifted to us in this way by each of the Imams to one of us after every single one of us. And if you can hold on to this knowledge, you will not become someone who becomes confused at that time. One last hadith from our fifth Imam, Muhammad al-Baqir, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh. The Imam explains it in this way about these people who do not take their Imam Ma'soom and the state that they find themselves in. He says those who are not fixed with an Imam Ma'soom, their situation is the following. وَمَثَلَهُ كَمَثَلِ شَاةٍ ظَلَّتْ عَنْ رَاعِيهَا وَقَطِيعِهَا. The example of such a person without taking us Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam for their Imams is like the one who is that of a sheep which has lost the shepherd and remains wandering looking for his shepherd here and there all day long. Thereafter, when night falls, the sheep mistakenly sees another group of sheep, thinks it's its own herd, and goes and joins that herd. But after the night passes and the day rises and they can see clearly, they become perplexed, realizing that this is not their shepherd nor their flock. And so they leave this flock, going to another flock. When they go to the next flock, they realize that is not their shepherd. They go to another flock. They remain perplexed, never finding their own sheep, their own shepherd, nor their own herd. And they start again and again and again. And again they find until they are in this situation. It ends up, the Imam says, they end their situation by being that they are wandering until the wolf finds them and devours them completely altogether. Can you see how the Imam warned his Shia not to split off from him, not to split off from Imam al-Baqir, not to split off from Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam after my death? This was the situation at the time of the Imam. The Imam faced two major problems. The first one was the ulama of Ahlul Madina that rejected him, and this is how he dealt with them. To show them my knowledge and my position is not ordinary. It is not in competition with the other ulama of Medina. This is an Imam Ma'soom you are dealing with. And then was the issues of internal dynamics within the Shia. And this is how the Imam tried to keep people together. For you and I, we really begin to see how blessed we are when we stick to our Imam. When we take from the knowledge of our Imam. Otherwise we end up like that sheep that is wandering between flocks, looking for a shepherd until the wolf devours us. This is what the Imam wanted people to avoid. One day, Imam alayhi salam is working hard in a garden whereby he's toiling and digging and working away. One of the people of the Shia notes and sees him sweating, tired, drenched in the heat of the sun. Says to him, Ya ibn Rasulullah, you're a noble man. How can we see you working like this? What if death was to overtake you in this state? Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam said, if death was to find me in this state, then I know that Allah would find me in a state of worship. But if death was to take me in a state other than serving Allah, that is the death that I fear. Immediately the man realized and submitted and said, yes, you are right, Ya ibn Rasulullah. With statements like this, people flocked to Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam. When he could overcome the ulama of his time, when the plots against the Shia were not winning, but Imam was keeping the Shia together, it meant that the Taghi of the time, Hisham bin Hakam, could only do one thing, and that was poison Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam. And Imam departed from this world in this state, with the poison running through his body. But imagine that the Imam himself is one of the narrators of the events of the 10th of Muharram. Imam al-Baqir was maybe but 3 years old at the time of the event of Karbala. But he is Imam Ma'soom. The same way he can narrate directly from the Prophet, he can narrate directly about the event of the day of Ashura. Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam says that when my grandfather Hussein fell from the horse, he had more than 300 wounds on his body. When my grandfather Hussein fell from the horse, he had so many arrows in his body that it was the arrows that touched the ground before his body touched the ground. My grandfather Imam al-Hussein, when he fell from the horse, had so many arrows in his body, he looked and resembled more like a porcupine or a hedgehog than a human being. This was the situation of my grandfather. Imam al-Baqir narrates that when the enemies killed Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, the horse of Imam ran back towards the camps. And he says that this horse, they chased this horse and they waited to see what would happen. The horse was neighing and screaming in his own language as a horse. What have you people done? You have slaughtered the grandson of your own prophet and messenger. These are the narrations of Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam about the 10th of Muharram. But can you imagine then how Imam al-Baqir was also taken captive like the rest of the Sabaya, forced to be able to walk from city to city. Imam al-Baqir had stones thrown at him. He had boiling water thrown at him. They used to mock and abuse Imam al-Baqir the same way they used to do so to the rest of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten the appearance of Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, to allow us to be alongside him at all times in our life and in our death. We ask you, Ya Allah, grant us the ziyarah of Imam al-Baqir fi dunya wal akhirah. We ask you, Ya Allah, whatever hajat we have, accept them bihaqqi Muhammad al-Baqir alayhi salam. We ask you, Ya Allah, help us to understand the life of Imam al-Baqir and apply his lessons into our own life. Walhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. وصلي يا ربي على محمد وآله الطاهرين.
سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله والله أكبر. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله